Now, we've got a national target of hitting global net zero by 2050, so that has to be our end date. What that means is we're going to have to work really hard on materials, because when we look at 2050 targets, we should be looking at the operational and the energy to build them.
Welcome to The Green Away. I'm your host, Rose Mary Petrass, Senior Journalist at FS Sustainability. We are recording on Gadigal land. We pay our respects to traditional custodians of country and elders past, present and emerging. Today, we welcome to the podcast Davina Rooney, CEO of the Green Building Council of Australia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really excited to come and talk all things sustainable buildings with you. Very excited.
So the GBCA provides guidance on and advocates for sustainability in the built environment sector. Members range from super funds to property developers, utilities, and even local government. The group promotes green building technologies, design, and operations. So let's start off with the basics. What is a green building?
A green building is, a highly efficient building powered by renewables, so better outcomes both from net zero buildings, healthier places for people, and importantly, looking at future focused. We need the resilience in mind. So to give you an example, I'm in, sunny downtown Barangaroo on Gadigal land, as you mentioned, and I'm in a building that's used less energy to build, fully powered by renewables, Australia's first carbon neutral precinct. There's beautiful plants all around us and, better access to daylight, designed with the future in mind. So what that means in this case is the facade is set up for future wind conditions, the ground's slightly raised for sea levels. So there's quite a lot of consideration. My favourite part about this building is that it has its own digester. There's, more than 90% of the waste is diverted from landfill, and it's got its own organic digester where the waste gets eaten on site. So a wide range of things across the environmental, social and governance side, but essentially delivering better places for people. We spend 90% of our time indoors. Why don't we have a fabulous environment?
That sounds amazing. What is the investment case for green buildings? Are they cheaper to deliver? What about the operational costs as well?
There's never been a better time to talk about the investable benefits of green buildings. So they cost a little bit more to build because you invest in better materials, you make better decisions up front. Our own research shows it's about 1% to 3% for those who are in our own program, Green Star, which is the largest holistic sustainable rating system in Australia. However, there's immediate benefits. They get about 4.5% more in valuation. The total returns are about 13% better than the average building. And why is that? There's two major factors. One, which is people like them more. They're happier, they're healthier, they're more comfortable. So they're stickier for tenants. So in office buildings, the weighted average lease expiry, the WALE, how long people stay around, is 25% longer in these buildings. And because the energy costs, they're actually cheaper to run. So it's kind of win, win, win on the investment case. And then the other piece is they tend to attract better financial deals, so you can get green mortgages, green bonds, green investments. There's a whole swathe of different incentives that they can garner. And so there's actually a really great time right now in a cost of living crisis to actually lean into better for more value.
And what kind of demand are we seeing for these types of buildings from investors?
Look, we are seeing absolutely huge demand from the investment community. So when we actually start to categorize what the market looks like, last year was the first time that green bonds took the lead over fossil fuel debt. So there was more investment in the green side of the market than some of the challenged sectors from a climate change perspective. When we look at sustainable financing within Australia, 44% of loans to real estate groups are labelled sustainable. So there's huge opportunities in these kind of areas. And we're seeing, when we speak to people in the market, we're told that, a lot of the large green debts, they're oversubscribed. There's more demand than we can possibly supply. And that is really critical because from an environmental perspective, we absolutely need the change. If you look at what we need to do in the Australian market to meet the challenges in the built environment, we use more than 50% of the energy in the grid. So we really need to move to help the market move. So the kind of stats of what we need to do on the home side is we need to be electrifying 500 houses a day between now and 2050, doing efficient retrofits. So there's a huge scope for that to move. And we also need to be focusing on retrofits across all the other asset classes. So there's a huge demand. There's a lot in the market. We need to join those things together. That's the reason why in London's Climate Week, we joined hands with the BRE, the US Green Building Council, our friends in Singapore, Alliance HQE for France, and launched a global guide on how to use green finance better globally in the built environment. Because there's a lot of excitement and there's a lot that needs to change. We need to reduce friction, join those things together, and do more deals that matter.
And of course, as you said, it's not all just about new buildings. There's, so much aging real estate that needs to be upgraded to be more energy efficient. Are we seeing momentum on retrofitting and refurbishment? And also, what kind of funding mechanisms are being used to upgrade that old building stock?
All great questions. And so we see, I spoke a little about the residential space. On the commercial space, we need to triple the sustainable retrofits. So that means moving from retrofits about 1% in the market to kind of 3.5% of commercial buildings to hit our target. So there's a big need there. We're seeing big appetite. What gives me hope is, people talk about Key Quarter Tower, the old AMP Tower in Sydney that was retrofitted into a new gorgeous facility. CNN coined it as the world's first upcycled skyscraper. But we've really got to lean into this, what's old is new again, and really lean into the retrofit agenda. The thing that gives me a lot of hope is we're seeing a lot of the financiers, whether it's Australia's Clean Energy Finance Corp or others, lean in and do big deals around how we need to retrofit buildings as they are. When I speak to leading market owners, they're saying, my building in Pitt Street, I was going to knock it down at this stage of the market. I should absolutely be retrofitting that building. And that's a really positive conversation. So why are we seeing that? We're seeing better finance deals. We're actually, so whether you see those in green bonds, there's a huge amount of incentives given to partners who are leaning into those spaces. And when I say those, on the mortgage side, the kind of incentives we're talking about is there's some upgrade funds. The federal government put $1 billion into programs at last year's budget to set us up for better financing. Some of those are being rolled out through the leading banks at the moment. At the other side, we're actually seeing, whether it's the Clean Energy Finance Corp or different deals which really have retrofits or coined as circularity at their heart. So I think this is an emerging space. Most of the finance deals we've seen have been, focused in the built environment on operational emissions, which has been a huge focus. But as the grid gets greener, we're really going to need to work on how buildings work with the grid, how we retrofit to reuse emissions, and how we seek to get these modern constructs into, some of our beautiful building stock. The Colosseum is nearly 2,000 years old, but sometimes in Australia, we say that a 20-year-old building, needs a massive retrofit. And so I think there might need to be a little bit of a change of thinking in this space. And it's very exciting to see fabulous design ideas brought to this space. The Opera House gives me a lot of hope. We awarded it world leadership in existing building after they worked through the stages. What's really impressive is they did all the things on the energy side. They did the hard work with the services. But, they use olive oil to polish the brass. They get out and use old-fashioned cleaning methods on the stairs, a little bit of bicarbonate of soda, and they're looking at how they actually change the way they do things from the simple to the complex to bring sustainability to the heart of that, whether that's cultural recognition in all of their shows or, a wide range across the gamut. So when people say it's hard, my building's old, I kind of say, well, the Opera House can do it. Why don't we work together and look at this differently?
And for those who are not aware, can you briefly give an explanation of why we want to upgrade these buildings? People talk about embodied carbon versus operational emissions in buildings. Can you explain a little bit behind that?
Absolutely. So appropriately for for most of the last 20 years, we've been really focused on operational emissions in Australia. Why is that? We had a grid with a huge amount of coal in it. Now, within Australia, we're, over 40% renewables. We're moving to a target of 82% renewables by 2030. So when you look at the emissions of our grid, they're going down, down, down. Now, we still have to keep working hard in that space. But what's happening as that grid becomes cleaner is that the embodied carbon becomes a bigger part of the pie. So we did a study with the federal government in 2021 that said, around the time of that study, it was about 16% of the emissions in the built environment was from materials. If we don't focus on materials, that'll turn into a whopping 85% by 2050. So that's where our focus has got to be, on the elephant in the room. And so if we can reuse materials, keep them in life cycle for quite a lot longer, where actually the thing that's becoming the biggest part of the pie, we can use that a lot better. A lot of this stuff comes down to things that my nana used to say, like waste not, want not. So the thing about this theme within buildings is, although it's got a complex name, the idea of using what you have better and for longer is something that I think has a lot of resonance with everyone.
Your climate positive roadmap advocates for all new buildings to be net zero by 2030 and for existing buildings to be net zero well before 2050. Is this even possible?
So we advocate for all new buildings to be net zero in operation by 2030. Now, what does that mean? A really efficient building that's powered by renewables, either on-site or off-site. Now, noting the grid's meant to be 82% by 2030, that's, we're in a close ballpark, and they should be fully electrified, because if you're going to have it powered by renewables, then you shouldn't actually be using fossil gas. That's right at the heart of it, what a net zero operational building looks like. And we should be absolutely focused on those. We've been building those, the leaders have been building those for most of this decade. And we actually had one of our leaders, GPT, certify a whole portfolio of existing buildings in 2020, seeking to align to those standards. We've set a longer time for existing buildings, because of the changes that you'll need to make in them over time, recognizing that change is complex, it does take time. Now, we've got a national target of hitting global net zero by 2050, so that has to be our end date. What that means is we're going to have to work really hard on materials, because when we look at 2050 targets, we should be looking at the operational and the energy to build them. So I think we're right on track. There's nothing technically stopping us for the 2030 target. We don't actually have a technology problem. We just have an us designing our buildings to these standards. What's really heartening is we're seeing a lot of these things embedded in the construction code and some of these thinking in various iterations. So I'd say we're moving in the right direction. I would absolutely acknowledge that to hit the 2050 for the whole build stock, we are going to have to work really hard on what we call the hard to abate sectors, or the complex sectors, green steel, complexities with concrete, work through these challenges. However, they're our entire nation's goals. For the whole nation to get there, the complex part of buildings has to get there. And we're seeing really exciting research opportunities. So I am one of life's forever optimists, and I look forward to, working with industry to deliver both, particularly while we're seeing such strong investable cases for them. I think we both have a will and a way, so I'm very excited about what this future looks like.
Thank you so much for your time today, Davina. Where can people connect with you and the work of the GBCA?
Well, if you open Google and you type in the Green Building Council of Australia, if you follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram, lots of different ways to engage, and we'd love to hear from your audience. We already work with large swathes of your community, but how do we change everything with everyone together? So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for having me.
Until next time, I'm Rose Mary Petrass, and thank you for listening.
The Greener Way podcast is a product of FS Sustainability, a show about people, the planet, and investing in our collective future. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The Greener Way podcast gives listeners access to information and educational content provided by discussing numerous financial sustainable options and our featured guests. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of The Greener Way are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the FS Sustainability website, fssustainability.com.au.